Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Teacher's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Brian Costello. The Teacher's Journey is a place where we talk to some of the best educators around about learning and life, so we hear the stories that make them the educators they are today. Welcome back to the Teacher's Journey. I'm really excited to have my guest with me here. She is one of the most remarkable women I know in the field of education, the field of educational technology. She's got just about every badge you can imagine on her page, though she really doesn't worry too much about those. My guest tonight is Rafranz Davis, author, technology advocate, educator, and so much more. Also leading BTS advocate in the United States here. So I'm sure we'll get into that at some point. And I'm just really excited to have Rafranz with us tonight because I was always an admirer of her work and of her ideas. And when I had the chance to meet her in Toronto and actually have conversation with her and learn a little bit more about her life and about her story, I really found out what a remarkable person she was. And how inspiring her whole journey has been. So I can't wait to really get into this conversation and just really happy you're joining us tonight. So thank you, Rafranz, for coming on the show. I am going to start this off basically the same way I start off with everybody else. So at some point in your life, the switch went from off to on, and you decided, I'm going to be a teacher. So what was that like? When did that happen? Like, when did you realize that you were going to go into education, that was going to be your thing?
It's really interesting that you say that, because education was the last thing I wanted to do. I was a kid that was always really good at math, and my church did outreach with the school. My mother was a paraprofessional at school, and she taught a lot of kids that were struggling to pass the state exams to graduate. And so we would tutor at my church. So when I was in middle school, my mother would grab me kicking and screaming to go to church, to go tutor kids. And one of them was actually a young lady that I used to play with. She lived down the street from me. And I was sitting there helping her with what I thought was really easy algebra as a middle schooler. And it just kind of occurred to me that, that maybe mama is onto something. And maybe this is something I want to do. What's funny is even then I still didn't want to. I went to college. I tutored the basketball team, half the football team. My roommate still didn't want to do it. I wanted to major in computer science and then math, but not to be a math teacher. And then music. Like, I was all over the place. And it was actually my second time going back to college, because I was one of those people that went to school but then ended up having to go back home. I went back to college again as an adult after working in industry, and my job being one of those manufacturing facilities that like to lay people off. And when my department was laid off, I took a job in Dallas, driving, making $8 an hour, 45-minute drive to work and home every day. And one day, I pulled off from the highway. I always tell the story of something kind of poked me and said, go back to school. And on the way to work, I listened to the poke, and I drove off the road, turned around, drove all the way back home, past our house 30 minutes later to the nearest community college, and went and signed up for school. And at that moment, that's when my journey to become a teacher actually began.
And that's remarkable, because, everybody says, oh, there's this moment, like this calling, and people can point to, moments like you had with your mom where you're teaching kids and you realize you're good at it, or that you liked it, or you had some teacher that really inspired you, or whatever it might be. But you literally just like stopped your car on the side of the road and were like, turned around, signed up for school, and there it was. And I think that's.
Oh, it's even more remarkable than that. I mean, classes were starting like the next week. I walked into the community college. I'd been there before. I just hadn't been there as an education major. And I didn't have any financial aid. I had no money. I had probably 50 cents in my pocket. I had 2 children at home that I knew I needed to take care of. This was already post-divorce Rafranz. I went and signed up for classes. My tuition was like $3,000, which clearly I didn't have. I signed up for financial aid. The lady told me, well, if you're going to have to come up with the money to pay this by Friday, or else we're going to drop your schedule. So I just, didn't fill out the financial aid paperwork, and I knew what would happen, but in my mind, I was like, I've got to figure this out. I'm supposed to go to school. And I get a call the next day from the college, and she said, "You're not going to believe this. We already got your financial aid package ready. So your classes are good to go." So, I mean, it's just, I still do believe in teaching being a calling, but I think that it manifests itself in different ways. Some of us feel like we have been destined to be this from the moment that we knew how to play school. That was not me. I didn't play school. I played lawyer. And then there are some of us that it just kind of happens that way. And it just so happens that I was really good at something and had some early experience with it. And it came at a time in my life when it was the right time and the chips fell together.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I connect with a lot about your story, is that I didn't go to school to be a teacher. I used to play lawyer and argue with everybody about everything. I still kind of do that sometimes. I try to check that a little bit, but and when I went back to school, like when I went back into a school for the first time, that's when I realized, like, hey, this is a great place for me to be. So it was very like, and then I had to go back to school, and I was working like 3 jobs and everything. And I'm sure you worked a ton, plus your 2 kids and everything, just to get it together. So that whole thing, you go through all that, you get a job. And tell me about, like, you got your first job, you're walking into the classroom on the first day, all the things you've been through just to get to that point. Like, what was the feeling like starting out your first time as a teacher?
So my starting as a teacher, again, was also different than most people. To even stay in school, I started working at a clothing store in town. I hated it with all my heart and soul, because people would come in and change their clothes in the dressing room and leave them stacked in the dressing room. And me, with my lazy self, had to go put up all their clothes, and it was annoying. And one day, a teacher from my son's school came in and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm actually in college studying to be a teacher." She said, "We have a paraprofessional position open. It's a math aide. What do you think?" And so she called the principal, like right there in the store. I went to the school the next day to talk to him, filled out an application the same day. So my first job in education was kind of following in my mom's footsteps as a paraprofessional, but at an elementary. And one of the things that really stuck out with me was walking into this school, which was also the same elementary school that I went to. And this little boy walks up to me and he says, "Ma'am, is you the new lunch lady?" And I looked at him and I was like, I knew exactly where he was coming from. He was a young Black boy, and there were no Black teachers in that school, other than the PE teacher. I don't want to leave Mr. Jones out. God bless his soul. He was my PE teacher too, and he gave me tons of swats, but I liked him. But that moment kind of set the tone for me in terms of, I knew kind of what I want to do and why I wanted to be there, but it just, it really did. It hit me I would be this person that children who were just like me would see. And maybe they might see themselves, or they might see something else other than what they've been accustomed to. So my first day, that happened like within 5 minutes of me walking in the building. So when I went down I had a classroom. It was, I think, the size of a closet. I just remember walking in there and crying. Because it wasn't a full-time teaching job yet, but it was a step towards getting there. Even when I finally got my first, full-time teaching job, because I'd already been in the system for a certain time and had some privileges while within it. Because when I tell you that when you're studying to be a teacher, or you're trying to go to college, the first thing that you learn is how the school works. So you kind of learn how to hustle within it. And that's sort of what I did in order to get my first real teaching job. It was, I think that I didn't even believe it. I didn't believe it until, because I was hired mid-year as a full-time teacher. Like my first real classroom that was Rafranz Davis's classroom didn't happen actually until like February or no, like March of that year. And I think I was in disbelief most of that year. So it really didn't hit me until I finally started at an August 1st. I always joke with people, you know, you're supposed to go to New Teacher Academy. I've never been to a New Teacher Academy because it just never happened that way. I was always placed in a position where it just didn't happen. But that was, I don't know if I can explain it any way than that. Like everything about me being a teacher was unbelievable.
Yeah, I think I understand that, but I mean, I worked 3 years as an aide. I mean, I think that's what happens when you go back to school and you try to come back at teaching when you're not coming at it from the conventional space. So I worked 3 years as an aide. I mean, 3 years, and I did everything in that school. And I got a job somewhere else. I was the only teacher.
I didn't. Let me tell you. So I was an overachiever. Big time. That's just probably is not surprising to a lot of people. But because I had been through so much, I was, when I say post-divorce, I think I was going through a divorce for a long time, even after I, started working in a school and teaching. And for me, it was all about trying to get back on my feet and trying to take care of the two young kids that I now had at home. So going to college for the traditional 4 years was never an option for me. I knew I had to be out in 3 years, period. Even when my professor said it's impossible, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. So I worked full time and took up to 21. One time I did 22 hours of college so I can get done. And I worked through summer 1 and summer 2 sessions and all through school. So I was an aide for 2nd through 5th grade. 1st through 5th grade. What was it? 1st through 3rd grade. It's 1st through 3rd grade. Sorry, because they changed elementary schools for 1 year. At the end of that year, my college said, all right, it's time for you to intern, which was highly ahead of schedule. Like my principal was mad at me because they wanted me to come back another year, to make $10,000 a year, but that's a whole nother story. So anyone has been a paraprofessional understands. So So my assistant superintendent, and I wish she was still there. She's retired. She actually arranged for me to intern with a 6th grade math teacher with no additional aid duties. My only job was to mentor underneath this teacher. I was not to have extra duties assigned. I was not to have any run copy duties. My job was to be in her classroom. And I did that for 1 semester. And then I was hired at mid-year of that year. So like I worked our 6th grade center for 1 semester. And then by December, I got my first full teaching check. And that's like a huge, huge deal. But it's I don't even remember what the question was. I feel like I've gone off the rails.
No, this podcast is all about being off the rails. That's the whole point. But that's all really, that's amazing. Like if you think about, you put in a lot of hard work, and I think this is important. I think one of the things I want to highlight here is you've touched on a lot of the people who made some of those things possible for you. Despite the fact that you worked incredibly hard and you put so much into it. One of the things that I see so often is the idea that we kind of make ourselves, and that's like this, that you can just pull yourself. You need people to help you out. Like
I had my college professor. I had mentor teachers from my church. I had the most impactful person for me. Her name was Jessica O'Bannon. It was Burns at the time when she passed away. But my first year as an aide in the elementary school is when it really got bad with my divorce. And we forget sometimes that teachers are people too, and sometimes we go through things. And at that time, my ex-husband was harassing me and like doing it just to the point that I could barely function during the day. And so she came to my classroom, she closed the door, and she says, "We need to talk." And I said, "What?" She says, "You have got to learn how to leave it at the door." She said, "You've got to understand that when these kids come in here to you, they need you to be the person that helps them get through the work they need to do during that day." She goes, "I understand that you're going through a lot of stuff." She goes, but you can't have them come in here and not get what they need to get from you. You have to figure out how to leave it at the door. This is a person who was going through cancer at the time. And if anybody understood how to leave it at the door, and I watched the strength of which she walked for the next few years, she knew that. And that moment actually probably saved my career, because I could have been not hired. I could have, had some mark on my record, but for not doing my job because I couldn't get through the day. And this idiotic person that was bothering me. Now, of course, I had to take some steps in order to make sure that he wasn't, interfering with my school job, my work. But that idea of the strength of what teachers have to do it's almost like you have to be human, but leave a piece of yourself outside. That was when I learned that I had to do that.
I think that's amazing. I mean, that's amazing mentor advice right there. And I mean, people talk about their mentor teachers, but all this stuff, and most of the time I hear people talk about their mentor teachers, and I feel bad for them because either their mentor teachers didn't really do anything for them, or they weren't a real mentor. But I can't think of a better example of great mentoring than her pulling you aside and saying, you got to leave this stuff somewhere else. Wherever, you got to just drop the baggage at the door. You can pick it up when you leave. But, and I've always found one of the great things for me when I've had been a classroom teacher was, no matter what was going on outside of my life, I could just immerse myself in everything that was happening right there, and just kind of the rest of the world melts away, and all you have time to focus on is that moment, like that thing. And it's almost therapeutic, but at the same time, it's hard because you do need to be yourself. And you make a great point that you have to bring yourself in, and let the kids in to see you, but you can't let out all of it. Sometimes you do have to hold some of it back or leave it out because they need more. They need something else. And
yep.
That's phenomenal advice that you got from that teacher. That's great. So your career is going pretty well, I imagine. You're hardworking, you're intelligent, you've got a break, got people helping you out. When did you kind of figure out, like, okay, when did you figure out, I understand what I'm doing, I got this under control, like teaching is kind of like, when did it feel like it was settling in or slowing down or kind of falling into place for you?
I don't think it ever does, honestly. I think that a great teacher never gets complacent. I think that we're always in a constant state of reflection. I happen to go to a university that was partnered with the community college I went to, and in doing so, met probably the most important teacher in my life. And her name is Dr. Vanessa Hughes. And she handed me my graduation, a journal. And the gift, I tutored for her, so I got to be one of the people that got a present from her. But she handed me a journal, and she said, every day when you go home, you write down the 3 things that went really well that day. And you also write down the 3 areas where you would like to be better. And you make every day intentional about being better. And you continue to reflect and do that. And that is something that I have done every day to this day. It is really looking at my practice and myself. I always joke that it didn't matter what my teaching evaluation said. I was always going to be the hardest one on myself anyway. But I would always see the areas where I needed to improve, even when others didn't. And I don't take that lightly. It doesn't mean that I don't see the great things. And honestly, there have been times even in this last year that I didn't see the great things, and I kind of had some moments. But I try my best to make it a habit of just continuing to be reflective. I don't think I've ever sat back and said, all right, I've got it. I think I've always really sat back and said, all right, today went well. Now what's next?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's spot on with reflection and getting better. I just know, I know for me, at some point, it went from being like me, like running around with it as like trying to manage the chaos to me managing the chaos, like instead of being managed by the chaos. So like, that's what I was really thinking, like for me at the beginning, I felt totally overwhelmed. Like I spent 3 years in the classrooms. I thought I knew what I was doing. And I walked in the classroom the first day and I was like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, it was just like,
But I think that's normal. I'm still that way. And
yeah.
I'm not in the classroom anymore, and I'm still that way. I think that I question myself more in this job role than I did as a classroom teacher. I have basically like the scroll list of things that we've accomplished in the 3 years that I've been here, and I went into such a funk thinking that, oh my God, I'm not doing all of these things, and I can be doing X, Y, and Z better. And I think that we all do that, and that's normal. But I also think that we have to find that place where we can kind of draw the line on the I have no idea what's happening, and get to the point where we can figure out how to get beyond that.
Yeah. Like I might not know what's happening, but I'm going to figure it out and make it work. Yeah. Absolutely. And so you mentioned the shift in role. And I definitely want to touch on that. So you left the classroom and moved into administration. And I mean, what was the thought process, the decision, in terms of like why leave the classroom?
So as a high school math teacher, I actually worked at the high school where I attended high school. I got to teach in the school where I graduated. And I was surrounded by teachers who honestly didn't care about the kids in their room. I sat and listened to my principal announce at the beginning of the year 2 young men that he wanted out of the school. They were they were 2 young African American boys. He stood up in a meeting and was like, these kids don't mean no good. They have no business here, and whatever. By the end, we're going to get them out of here. He wasn't talking about getting them out through graduation. He meant getting them out through expulsion in some way. And I watched the teachers react to that and treat them like crap. And in one case, there was a teacher across the hall who was yelling at one of them, like top of his lungs, because he fell asleep in class. And I left my class to go across the hall because it was that bad. And he was still yelling, and he had thrown the boy out of his room and said, I kid you not, said it in this, my class heard it and so did his. One of these days, that kid is going to get stopped on the side of the road, and the cops are going to be beating the heck out of him, and I'm not going to stop and help him. And that just, I think that at that moment, I just kind of went into, I tried not to cry. I had to get strong and and let my mother come out in my soul at that moment. I always say that when I'm channeling my mother or my grandmother. But I had to go into that office and help him. And I told him exactly what happened and what that teacher said. He was not reprimanded. The teacher wasn't. And I demanded that they put him in my classroom. Put that child in my classroom. He does not need to be in his room. And while you're at it, get his cousin out of that room too. Give them both to me. And they did. And what's funny is the counselor was like, are you sure? And I'm like, absolutely. We put him in my classroom. Let's do it. But in terms of like who I wanted to be, I knew that I wanted to help other teachers. I wanted to help train and plan and develop. But I also wanted to be able to have the kind of conversations that we needed to have about how to support the kids in the way that they needed to be supported. And I didn't think my high school was doing it. To this day, honestly, I'm not there, and I still don't. But that was kind of the moment. And right when I decided I was going to go, it was any opportunity possible. And I mean, it didn't work out that way with every opportunity possible. It did eventually, the right one came. The right one actually ended up me leaving my high school altogether and going to Grand Prairie to be a math strategist. But I was able to take those skills and that passion into a different school and have a great amount of success.
And so one of the things that I think is a common recurring theme from the stories that I hear you talking about is your experience with race and your experience with how people have either seen you as you've walked in, or how students are reacted to in and around you. And so I wanted to ask, as an administrator, as someone who I know I've looked up to you in terms of your, you know, your work and the things you put out and shared with people. Talk about, and I mean, you wrote a book about this as well. So I don't want to discount that you did write a book about missing voices in ed tech, but more importantly, just can you talk about being an administrator, being someone who has a lot of influence and at a higher level in the school district, and what that means for not just for you, but maybe for some of the students who see you on a hopefully more get to see you in that role, working with teachers, trying to help their teachers. What do you see that? Because I know, like you said, your first day in the school, the little boy thought you were the lunch lady. Now you walk into the school and, you're telling the teachers what to do. Not necessarily telling the teachers what to do. That's not what I mean. But.
No, because my role isn't really like that. I mean, my job in my school district is executive director of professional and digital learning. So I actually have 2 specialists in my department that get deployed out to schools to work with teachers.
Okay.
So there are times when some of this, I've seen students in different programs I've participated in, whether it be robotics or walking into multimedia, or running a program and getting students to help. And the students are usually, they have a lot of questions like, what do you do? How did you get here? Blah, blah, blah. One of my favorite moments was I got to go to one of our elementary schools to mentor and teach a group of 5th grade girls to code. And this is one of our schools that is majority minority. So every one of the girls were either Black or Hispanic. Just that kind of those interactions when I'm getting to work with younger kids in a smaller, safe space, kind of where they can kind of be themselves. I don't know. I don't think I'll really ever truly understand how much of a difference that makes. I can only imagine what it would have been like for me. Had it been me at that age and seeing someone like me, it would have made me see an area as a possibility. So when I work with them, I don't come in as executive director. I come in as tech geek, creator, Rafranz, Ms. Davis. So they don't see my title. They get to see me building, coding, and making. Yeah. And I think that changes the dynamic completely.
Is you engaged in the types of things that they think are interesting, and that's awesome. I mean, we talk a lot about things that are awesome in education, but I think that really is one of them where you get to make that kind of a difference and show people what can happen for them, what's possible. I know the school that I work at, there's a lot of kids who don't see people who look like them. And, it's not anything that I can say I can necessarily do anything about, but it's something you notice when you walk into the school, and you notice that. And I think,
but I think that's what makes you different. You notice it. There are people who don't notice it. They have no idea what the significance of that means. The fact that you notice it makes you different already.
Well, that I guess that's a positive, I suppose. I wish that I look at my kids and I think, I can't know everything you need to know, and I can't know everything you've been through. I can, if you need me, I'm here, and that's the best I can do. But I just look at that, and I think throughout your stories, you've kind of highlighted points where it's popped up over and over again, and I just wanted to kind of touch on that because ignoring it, I think, would be an injustice to the whole conversation. But so. I've enjoyed you sharing some of your story. There's probably a million hours more of the awesome things and the sad things and the everything in between.
That's the hard part, is I was trying to cut, I was really nitpick. There were things that I'm leaving out years of gaps, but I'm like, well, you can't be here all night. So
I mean, people might listen to this for 3 or 4 hours, but I don't think you can do that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe people are ready for a 3-hour podcast. I'm not.
No. They're barely going to make it past a 5-minute podcast. So
That's usually.
if you're listening to this, and I don't know how long this is going to be, you are a trooper, and I love you.
Yeah. So, but I appreciate you giving your time. I mean, this is time you could be watching BTS, smiling, talking to your grandbabies, doing all kinds of things. So before I add the last question, I have to get to this before, because I know I gotta get this story somehow. So when did you fall in love with BTS? How did you?
So I have to correct something you said at the beginning.
BTS number one.
I will. You call me like the biggest U.S. advocate, and that is not true. I might be the biggest 43-year-old teacher in Texas advocate, but the fan base of BTS is so deep. There are people that have been here since when these kids started in 2013. I just happened to peek around the corner after they performed at the American Music Awards, and I didn't even watch the award show. I was going on YouTube the next day to watch the highlights, because I do like to see some performances. And I didn't even click them. I think I was watching, I don't even know what I was watching, but when YouTube gives you a suggested video, I was like, what is this? So I clicked it, and I was like, So I watched their performance, and I remembered that they trended on Twitter. And so I went back to Twitter, and I looked at the trend from Twitter, and I saw just the insanity of people, the mobs at the airport, the merchandise they were selling through the AMAs. I started watching all their interview videos, because they did a ton of them. And then it led me to YouTube reaction videos, which I realized I don't like that much. By the way, the YouTube reaction world is strong. That basically there are people who make money watching videos and talking about it. And because BTS is so huge, there's a library of BTS reaction videos, and they're not all awesome. But I started watching more of their videos, and they're so creative. And the videographers that are also from South Korea they make videos that there are no videos that are created by U.S. artists that can touch them. I have never seen anybody with performances the way that they have. So once I kind of fell into that space, I realized something else about myself. I used to kind of do Twitter, and I was angry all the time. Most of it was because of kind of the U.S. political scene, which was strong on Twitter, especially with the amount of news coming out in real time. And even with kind of the things that annoyed me about EdTech, the constant repetitive things that annoyed me about EdTech, it just I felt like I was angry, and I hated that. But when I started getting into kind of BTS, or maybe it was the music and culture aspect of it, I found that I was less bothered by kind of the things that really made me so uptight about social media. So instead of me tweeting about, oh my gosh, you're really talking about this ed tech tool, blah, 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 or look at what so-and-so said and did or didn't vote on, I would watch a BTS video, listen to music, read fan comments. I started kind of getting into that space, and it helped me to be a more calm person. It also helped me to channel and think about things before I say it, because all of a sudden I didn't want to be just angry Rafranz, and I definitely didn't want to be perceived as that.
That's pretty amazing that the music and the videos and the artwork all kind of inspired that within you. I know I reached out to you and asked you a little bit about it not that long ago, because I had a couple of kids who are big into not just BTS, but Korean culture, period. Like the one girl said, I'm like, what are you doing to go home? She goes, I'm going to watch Netflix. I'm like, what are you watching on Netflix? She's like, K soap operas. I'm like, what?
K-dramas.
Yeah, K-dramas.
K-dramas. So I watch them because I'm trying to learn Korean, and Jenny McGarrett told me to watch K-dramas. She says, if you really want to know how Koreans talk, She goes, you need to watch K-dramas. Like, continue to study, but you need to watch K-dramas. So I think some people pick it up a lot faster than others. I don't. There's certain things I can pick up. Like, I hear it and I'm like, oh yeah, I know what that means. But yeah, I watch a lot of K-dramas. I'm not into every K-pop artist. I kind of look at it like, I love Beyonce, but I don't love every person, every Black woman singer that's on stage, or every R&B artist. Huh? They're not the same. They're not the same. And I think that that's okay to say that they're not all the same. I love BTS because they write their own lyrics. They produce their own music, and what they talk about has meaning to it. They talk about real issues. They talk about social issues that impact them and their generation. And they do it in just such an eloquent manner. Plus, the fandom of people, like, I'm learning even more about education and ed tech through doing this. There are people who do nothing but translate lyrics, videos, content, tweets, fan messages, all this stuff. Like, if they post something, it is absolutely in Korean, and then 10 seconds later, someone has posted the English translation. And I just think that is just so amazing, just to watch people work together to bridge that gap in understanding, but then also help to promote their music. That is, like, I'm in awe of it.
Yeah, that community that's built behind the music is that's phenomenal. Like, I mean, that's the kind of community you want to see built in other areas.
Yeah,
that sometimes is lacking. So very cool. So, all right, one last thing to leave everybody with, for teachers and people who are listening to this. I ask them, and I ask everybody, kind of, if you're going to give somebody advice, somebody who's either going into teaching or who is kind of struggling with continuing through teaching because they've hit a snag, what would you tell that person to help them, either get into teaching or to get through that rough period?
My mother used to tell me, when, not just me, but when people were going away to college, and this was kind of a saying that they used to say, get your teaching license so you have something to fall back on. So if you're looking at teaching as something to fall back on or a second career, don't do it. You do it because you believe in it and you really want to help kids. Because when you get into teaching, you're not there just to teach math, to teach science. You're there to teach kids, and kids come with a lot of baggage. And that means sometimes the science lesson you had planned is not the thing you're going to do that day. It means sometimes there's something else that has to be done bigger. And I think it's important to know that. And if you've been teaching for a while and you've kind of gotten in a rut and you don't feel motivated, then you need to find some other areas of life that can help bring you joy. So I play the flute. I also used to paint, and I do digital drawing. I had to go back into relearning things, relearning how music again, relearning art again, and I don't even want to call it a hobby. You need to have passions outside of education, because once you have passions outside of that, that means you're going to continuously learn and grow in that. And if you can stay connected to that person who is a constant learner, who is constantly growing, it'll help you stay motivated and connected to what you do in the classroom.
Absolutely. I love the passions outside of education thing. It's real easy to just be all teaching stuff all the time. And sometimes I jump into that because of the different things I'm trying to do right now. But, then I pull back and realize, like, I'm just going to hang out with my kids today. And that's my thing. I love hanging out with my kids and doing stuff with them. And having different things that you love to do is so important, because it's just one of the many ways you can refresh yourself and recharge your batteries, which sometimes with all the baggage kids can come with, can sometimes it gets saddled on you, and you end up bearing it, and that'll weigh you down. So I love that advice. And I can't thank you enough for sharing all the great things you shared with us. And anybody who's still listening to this, you got some inside information here that Rafranz is a flautist, I believe is the proper term. And if I had known that, I would have asked her to have the flute ready to play for everybody. But
no, you weren't. No, you weren't.
But so thank you very much. I look forward to share everybody hearing this, and I'll hear everybody again next time you see us on the teacher's journey.